welcome everybody. We are going to go over the material in week 6, dealing with campaigns and elections, interest groups and media, politics and communication. So hopefully you got your PowerPoint. Let's talk a little bit here on slide number 2, talking about political parties, okay? A party is a coalition of interests joined together in an effort to get candidates for public office elected under a common label. Okay, in other words, parties emerge as there's perhaps an issue that arises in the country, and so you got all these different interests that gather together and they bond together, and perhaps they send candidates for office. A great example of this is the issue of slavery and the rise of the Republican Party in the late 1850s. Is that party emerged because of the dominating issue that they gathered together to abolish slavery. Okay, so they were known as the anti-slavery party, if you will. Kind of interesting. And U.S. campaigns are generally party-centered. Either Democrats, Republicans. They're competing for elections. We have some third parties in our country, but it's really hard for them to gain ascendancy because we kind of have a winner-take-all system where it's not like there's fragmented, okay, this candidate got 30%, so you get 30% of the delegates, and this candidate get 20%, and they get 20% of the delegates, and this candidate gets 10%, and they get 10% of the delegates, which happens a lot in European politics, but not in parliamentary elections, but not in the American system, okay? And campaigns can also be candidate-centered. Okay, where it's not so much the party as it is the candidate. A great example of that would be President Trump, where yes, he ran under the Republican Party ticket, but he and he was asked, if you recall, in the 2015-2016 election season, are you going to basically create a third party? And he said no, because smartly so, because usually third parties never win, at least major elections. But again, his rise was not so much, wow, the Republican candidate, but more Trump as the person was very, very important. And so that's an example of like a candidate-centered type of election, okay? If you go to slide number 3 there, you'll see that in the United States, political competition again centers on 2 parties, largely because, again, it's winner take all. To win an electoral majority, candidates for the 2 major parties must appeal to a diverse set of interests. So what tends to happen is candidates generally don't go far right and far left, okay, when they're voting, when they're trying to get elected, okay, because you're trying to appeal to the broadest base of people. And if you go hard left or hard right, you're going to alienate a large part of a voting block, okay? Again, it's not unusual for somebody, an example of President Obama that tended to stay more middle of the road, but then when he became president, he went farther to the left, okay? Not always so, but that's an example of what tends to happen. U.S. party organizations are generally decentralized and fragmented. Okay, is that the national organization is a loose collection of state organizations, which in turn are loose associations of local organizations. Okay, so in other words, there's a reason for that because of federalism. The founding fathers did not want the accumulation of power at the center. So they again, remember James Madison in Federalist 10. He said the latent causes of faction is sown into the nature of man. And so because of that, he felt it was really important to extend the sphere of territory upon which a republic was centered or rested upon, so that, again, you would have a diversity and multiplicity of interests. And that's by design, so you don't have one group kind of taking power over everyone. Okay, that's one of the blessings of our system of government, okay? And one of the challenges we're going to see is a lot of the power of parties today is weaker than it's ever been because of a number of reasons, and we'll get into that, okay? So if you turn to slide number 4, okay, talking about party competition and majority rule, political parties are called linkage institutions, okay? They link people with government, okay? That's a big part of what a political party does, okay? It links people with government, okay? If you didn't have a political party, you know, how does the average person get connected to government and you know, public policies and things like that, okay, without that. You know, and again, there's competition among parties, and again, that allows, and you see this in the election right now, of course, with the Trump presidency. It's interesting because things are very, very, shall I say, animated and dynamic and energetic. Although it is interesting to see Joe Biden, which you hardly ever see the guy, and it, you know, which is very interesting. This whole COVID-19 thing has played into has helped, in my opinion, the weakness of Joe Biden, because as far as his public appearances and being able to convey coherent information, you know, Joe Biden has committed a lot of faux pas, and you know. Is there going to be a debate between Joe Biden and Trump because of COVID-19? I don't know. But what I'm saying is Joe Biden appears to be weak in that area, but because he can't get out and about because of social distancing and all of those limitations, it actually helps. It's actually helping him right now. So it's kind of interesting how that's playing out. This election of 2020 will just be really, really interesting. If you go to slide number 5, you'll see that when we're talking about the first political parties, the early founders mistrusted political parties. They did not think they were a good thing. In fact, in Washington's farewell address, he warned the nation of the baneful effects of parties. So there really weren't parties when President Washington was president, because he did not like them. And again, he was the father of the country. He was the guy, right? There was really no one else that could run against him and win. Excuse me. And so because of that, it was really easy to say that parties are a bad thing. But what's interesting is following his presidency, you basically saw the rise of parties. Okay, you saw the rise of the Federalist Party, and then you know you had the rise of the Democratic Republicans under Jefferson and Madison, and it's been kind of a two-party system ever since. But originally, it was not something that was looked on favorably. Okay. So if you go to slides number 6 and 7, you'll see, again, what George Washington thought about parties in his farewell address. He says, "I've already intimated to you the danger of parties in the state with particular reference to the founding of them on geographical discriminations. Let me now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party. Generally, the alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetuated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism." Go to the next slide. "The common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and the duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it." In other words, he's saying we don't want political parties. "It serves always to distract the public councils and enfeebles the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms." Okay, do we see that right now in the American political landscape? With the Democrats and you know going against Trump and vice versa, you know, is there agitation in the community? Is there animosity? Is there ill-founded jealousies? Yeah, it goes on all the time. In other words, the very thing that Washington was concerned about is exactly what's going on in America right now. And again, I'm not just picking on Trump or picking on the Trump presidency, because this went on. In fact, one of the most contentious elections and campaigns was between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams in the 1800 election. All kinds of mudslinging going on. Okay, in other words, this is not in other words, you know, people are shocked and whatever right now, but I mean, it was bad back then as well. To this degree, perhaps not, but the point is, you know, a lot of the concerns that George Washington had, I think are well, well founded. You know. it agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms. It kindles the animosity of one part against another, foments occasionally riot and insurrection. It opens the door to foreign influence and corruption, which find a facilitated access to the government itself through the channels of party passions. Has one of the charges of the Democrats against Trump, Washington, collusion with the Russians, okay? It has not been proven, okay? But that charge remains, okay? All of this stuff is exactly what Washington was saying. Hey guys, if you get parties, this is the kind of stuff that's going to happen, okay? So thus the policy and the will of one country are subjected to the policy and will of another. So I'll let you decide for yourselves whether you think parties are a good thing, okay? If you go to slide number 8, again, talking about some of the first parties, America's first parties originated in the rivalry between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, okay? Jefferson opposed Hamilton's attempt to strengthen the federal government through the creation, through national commerce, through the creation of a national bank. Jefferson thought, again, and this was true of a lot of those connected to America's founding, although Hamilton was too. But both Washington, Madison, and Jefferson were of the firm opinion. Listen, I've scanned the Constitution, and I don't see any provision for a national bank. If the Constitution doesn't say there is one, you shouldn't have one. In other words, that they really tried to adhere to the enumerated powers of the Constitution. Hamilton was like, we need to expand commerce, we need to go for it, okay? But that created the origins of some of these first parties. So the Federalist parties were Alexander Hamilton's followers. Hamilton took the name from the faction that spearheaded the ratification of the Constitution, the Federalists. It was preoccupied with commercial and moneyed interests. Jefferson's defeat of the Federalist John Adams in 1800 effectively ended Federalist control of the White House or Congress. Now, the Federalists controlled the Supreme Court for the next 30 years because you had John Marshall, who was an Adams appointee, who was a Federalist. So you can extend your legacy as a president. You can extend the legacy of your party as a president by appointing Supreme Court justices who will tend to embrace, well, not always, but they tend to embrace that viewpoint. And again, because they there's no term limit, and they can serve for 30 plus years, you can see whether you can extend that. But for the Federalists, in this case, they lost the presidency and the control of Congress after 1800. Another party that arose in 1800 with Jefferson and Madison was the Democratic Republican Party. These were Jefferson's followers. The name harkened behind the spirit of the Declaration of Independence and reflected the party's strength among small farmers and states' rights advocates. Okay, so Jefferson Jefferson really felt that small farmers was more important than big cities, because they thought there was a corrupting influence when people gathered together in big cities. Madison felt the same way. So the Democratic Republican Party in turn split in the 1820s following James Monroe's presidency, with Andrew Jackson embracing Jefferson's commitment to the common people, and he adopted the name the Democrats. Okay, with Andrew Jackson, we have the beginnings of the Democrat Party. Okay. Moving on here to the next slide, this would be slide number 9. Okay, you see again other parties moving from Jackson. Okay, so Jackson's goal was to wrest political power from the established elite. There's a lot of parallels between Andrew Jackson and Donald Trump. Okay, Donald Trump's motto, if you've heard it before, is drain the swamp. There are a bunch of elites in Washington, in the administrative state, who are individuals that politicians come and go, but these bureaucrats are embedded and they stay, okay? And even as Andrew Jackson tried to resist that and say, listen, I'm an outsider. Again, he was a general, okay? He was an outsider. And in other words, I'm not beholden to the elite's interests, okay? I represent the common man, very similar to President Trump. I represent the common man. I don't care about the whole Washington insider stuff. I'm going to try to drain the swamp, which is admittedly probably a big reason why there's so much pushback against Trump, because you've got a lot of these individuals within the administrative state that don't like their turf being challenged. Okay, So then you had the rise in the 1830s of the Whig Party. Okay, this was an opposition party that challenged the Democrats. This was a catch-all party whose followers were united less by a coherent philosophy than by their opposition for one reason or another to Jackson and his followers. And then in the 1850s, as the slavery issue began to tear both parties apart, the Whig Party disintegrated. But then in the 1850s, you had the Republican Party emerge in the North. That again, they were the anti-slavery party, okay, where the Democrats tended to, embrace more slavery back then, okay. So you had those arising. So we'll stop here and we'll continue on.